This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former legislator, former candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Linda Coleman, from Pitt County, I might add, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon from the NC Policy Watch, and opposite him, Chris Sinclair, who's a political campaign consultant. Well, we've got a full agenda this week as we update you on bills under consideration at our legislature, talk about a legislative protest that led to arrest, and if we've got time, we'll talk about Governor McCrory's transportation reform proposals. So let's get started. Our legislature is entering its fourth month in session, and there's much to be done if they're to pass a budget, tackle some of the major issues they're considering, and adjourn by the 1st of July. We want our panel to comment on some of the legislation they're considering, talk about some winners and losers in the process, and give their predictions on what to expect. John, first off, one of the more interesting stories so far concerns Senate Bill 10. We talked about it early in the session. This is the bill that would abolish many of the boards and commissions, and both houses passed different versions of this bill, sent to a conference committee, and in an interesting development, the House voted down the compromise reached in the conference committee. Tell us the backstory of what happened here and where this leaves us.
Well, the House and Senate conferees worked out a bill that both sides thought they supported. It didn't do as much as the Senate originally did, but it did a little more than the House originally did as far as changing some of the commissions and the terms and so forth. Where they thought they had an agreement was about the special judges, Superior Court judges around the state. But it turns out that they hadn't got the details right, and it would have ended some judgeships earlier that were Republican appointed. So the House, who thought they had made a deal, realized too late that the deal had not been struck the way they expected. So they both Democrats and Republicans in the House said no, and I think they'll work it out. It was really kind of a screw up. It wasn't a big philosophical.
Well, the Senate said they weren't going to go back and renegotiate it, Chris.
They will.
Yeah, I think they will too, because I think they want, it just doesn't abolish boards and commissions. It changes, it tells people who were appointed to, say, an 8-year term, oh, by the way, your term is 2 years, your term is 4 years. I also thought it was interesting that a whole new provision creeped up, which we haven't seen before.
Yes.
And whatever you think of climate change, a provision in there said that no administrative agency could even begin to develop any policy around weather issues without the express written consent, as they say on sporting events, the express written consent of the General Assembly. That came out of nowhere. It wasn't in the original bill, and we used to think, and I think most people thought it was a good idea, you can't put new things in a conference report that hasn't been in either of the bills. So I thought that was another interesting twist.
One of the interesting things I thought about the bill was that at a time when everybody else seems to be looking at how to retain institutional knowledge, this bill seems to just clear it all out.
Yeah. Chris Sinclair, Governor McCrory proposed to reform Medicaid, assigning patients to managed care contractors. These reforms, however, are going to have to be passed by the legislature, and DHS Secretary Aldana Voss recently appeared before a joint subcommittee to discuss these plans. What do you gather from the reception she received over there?
Well, I mean, look, change is never easy, and this governor, Pat McCrory, governed on change. He knew that he had to come in. He managed on his campaign. His message was simple. State government's broken. There are things that we have to get in and fix, and he is fulfilling those campaign promises. The devil's in the details, and that will be worked out. But from transportation reform to Medicaid reform to broken government in general, this was his mantra, and he's fulfilling a lot of those campaign promises. So again,
but I don't think it's getting a good reception over the legislature.
I think it's one thing to say the government is broken, but when you have Nelson Dollar, the one of the more respected Republicans on Health and Human Services, giving the secretary and the plan a very chilly reception, I think this is much. I would have thought the governor would have worked some of these details out with the Republican legislative leadership. As I said before, had a press conference after they had sort of all been on the same page, then introduced it as a package. We haven't even really seen it introduced yet in the General Assembly.
Yeah, as far as it goes, Linda, there's some winners and losers apparently in this debate. The Academy of Family Physicians, the NC Medical Society, the hospitals have been very prominent in urging more discussion about this. With your experience in the legislature, I see study committee commission in the future here, do you?
Oh, absolutely, because Medicaid is going to be such a huge part of the budget. We are going to have to look at how we're going to work this out for the future, because it's not just this year, but it's the future budgets that will be impacted as well.
One of the things that I think that's interesting, John, is that hospitals are getting pretty beat up in this legislative session. There are 3 or 4 bills in there to expand same-day surgical centers, make them more transparent in their charges, talk even about ending their sales tax exemptions. What's going on with the attitude in the legislature that all of a sudden hospitals are getting attacked?
Well, hospitals aren't so much getting attacked; they're getting challenged. It's not. Let's pick a fight with the hospitals. Let's pick on them just because we haven't. The problem with it, hospitals claim to be businesses sometimes, and they make a lot of, the urban hospitals at least make significant margins. And then when you start saying, well, maybe you ought to be subject to competition like everybody else, and maybe you ought not to have special privileges, maybe you ought not to have, the free flow of money from the state treasury. Medicaid, we have one of the most expensive Medicaid programs in the United States, and the most expensive in the South. Hospitals and doctors get that money. They don't want to give it up, of course. That's not surprising. But these are situations where the hospitals have gotten some special breaks, special privileges, special perks for many years, and when challenged, they seem to think that there's some sort of
evil conspiracy. The big hospitals are one thing, aren't they? I mean, aren't there a lot of smaller rural hospitals?
I think that what people tend to forget about from the hospital standpoint is that they serve folk 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and anybody that comes through the door, they have to treat. It's part of their mission. They're not going to turn away. $1 billion in charity care across the state. And in some of these local rural communities, if you think about it, the hospital is the major employer. And
they're not as profitable as some of these places.
And if you pile on all of the things that are happening at the federal level and proposals at the state level to from removing their tax exempt status, all that's going to add up. They're going to have to start making difficult choices. Never had to do that before, and so the question is, how do they fulfill their mission?
Chris, nobody's arguing the fact that this is a very different legislative session from a lot of them. But even Blue Cross is under fire here.
Mm-hmm.
There's legislation in consideration that would prohibit Blue Cross from getting favored provider rates from hospitals and doctors. They were kind of sacred in the past.
Well, they had a lot of political connections. They still do, and a lot of these things aren't decided. I think it's part of the new world order on Jones Street. People are shifting, and power is shifting. Lobbying power is shifting. Certainly, legislative power is shifted. So I think it's all this. In some ways, the chaos is expected.
School vouchers and more when we return, but I want to remind you can watch NC Spin at your convenience by visiting our website, ncspin.com. Click on the YouTube button on the right. We post each week's show on Friday, and if you'd like to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter, Spin Cycle, you can do that also while you're on the website. Be sure to get the latest public policy debate on ncspin.com or NC Spin on Facebook.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
Raffaldini Vineyards is Chianti in the Carolinas. Enjoy Italian-style wines, breathtaking views, cultural events, and much more. Visit raffaldini.com.
As homeowners, we count on the mortgage interest and property tax deductions. I bought a home knowing that I would save on my state taxes.
My home is not an ATM for politicians in Raleigh.
I already pay my fair share.
It's wrong for politicians in Raleigh to take more of my money for their so-called tax reform.
It will hurt our fragile economy.
It will decrease home values and cost us money.
Help save the mortgage interest and property tax deductions. Visit taxreformfacts.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue our discussion of the legislative update. Linda Coleman, there's a lot of heavy lifting left to be done in this session. Here we are the first week in May. A budget's got to be passed, tax reform, we've got all kinds of other big issues. And Speaker Tillis has said they're going to be out of there by June 16th. You've been there before. Is this all going to come together this fast?
Well, you never can tell. It could come together, and it should come together because, after all, they do have a supermajority. What are they doing with it? I would say that if they stayed beyond July 1st, that they would get a lot of criticism because they have no one to negotiate with except themselves. To that end, they do have to look at that or have all of these study committees because they've got tax reform, education reform, infrastructure, immigration, constitutional amendments. They've got a whole list of legislation laid on the table, and they're not going to be able to get to it. It seems like they started off
kind of fast, and now it's kind of bogged down a little bit.
It's slowed down, so I think there's so much infighting that they're not able to get to all of the things they want.
I want to get back to some specific issues. Chris Wake, Representative Skip Stam, has long advocated for school vouchers. He's introduced a bill that would allow parents up to $4,200 in what he calls equal opportunity scholarship grants to attend private schools. The bill is aimed at low-income parents, but he said it would cover 52% of the people, the children in North Carolina, and would actually save the state money because we spend about $6,800 a pupil now. Critics say it's going to strip our schools of the resources they need. Tell us what you think about this bill.
Well, I think that you have to show me where it's going to strip the public schools, how it's going to affect them. I think that's what Skip's always maintained. And I think that, here's the thing about whether it's vouchers or whether it's tax reform or some of these big issues. I am sitting back saying, why is it that the legislature, and I think they have, obviously, the supermajority, why is it they have to bite off all of this in one session and accomplish all these things at once when they have a majority, and they will have a majority for the foreseeable future.
I did a column recently saying go slow and get it right. Chris, respond
I think
to what
that they can get everything that they want to get done.
Yeah.
They have to pace it. And
respond to what Chris was saying.
Well, I think if I was a Republican consultant, I would be worried about that. I mean, I think they're trying to do all these things at once means you make mistakes. Means
go back to the school bill.
Oh, the school vouchers. No, well, I think it's a bad idea. I'm interested that a significant number of this money won't go to new students. That's one reason why public schools will lose money. A significant number in the first 2 years go to people who are already at private schools. So that's how some of the money comes out of public schools to go to private schools. I think it's a bad idea. And remember, a lot of these schools are unaccountable. That's what's interesting to me.
All right, John, there's also a bill that's going to limit the class, or remove the limits from class size. Previously, we had limits on on all schools, but then restricted K through 3. This bill is going to take all of the restrictions away. The lawmakers say local schools ought to be able to make these decisions, but a lot of people are saying, particularly educators are saying, these larger classes are going to reduce achievement. What's the bill's chances, in your opinion?
Well, the bill doesn't make classes larger, and the bill doesn't affect funding for school districts, doesn't change it at all. It simply says local school districts can decide what to do. Now, many of the people who are hyperventilating about this proposal, I think, 15 minutes earlier were screaming about how Republicans won't let local governments do anything, and they're telling them, all these different mandates from Raleigh, and that's contrary to Republican philosophy about local control. Then when the Republicans turn around and actually act on the philosophy of local control, they're attacked upside and down the other.
Yeah, there's another education bill, Linda, that you and I have gone through the years in public education that would require the teaching of cursive handwriting in the multiplication tables. Yes. What do you think of it?
Well, I will tell you, in the long run, I believe that it does serve a purpose. I do like to be able to know how to multiply and to write cursive. I think that the texting is taking over, and but people need to know how to do more than one thing.
All right, final question in this section. The runoff law. North Carolina's current election law says a candidate's got to get 40% or more of the vote in order to escape a runoff. These runoffs cost us about $6 or $7 million every time, and generally attract on the runoff election 10% or less of the voters. So in the end, and John, you've talked about this in the past, a candidate wins with far less than the 40% to start off with. A proposal would just give the election to whoever wins the primary. What do you think of that?
I think that is superior to the current system. It happens in other states. They seem to survive. They have at least as good government, if not better, than we do. Essentially, second primaries, in most cases, are just symbolic events. They involve so few people that you don't really get a consensus of the candidate. You get even 1%, 2%, 3% of the vote that participates. It's basically a very expensive waste of time.
I agree. Anybody disagree?
Well, I don't think it's the best system. I think it might be better than we have now. I still think there's got to be some way to have instant runoff voting. We tried it in a judicial race, which was the worst place to experiment with it, where you vote for 2 or 3 candidates, and then we go down the list. If there's not somebody that gets 40 or 50%, then you go to the second place votes. I think that would be preferable, but I agree the current system doesn't work.
All right, more legislative action after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
North Carolina hospitals keep our communities and families healthy with quality, affordable care. And they're essential to our economy, employing more than 190,000 people with high-wage, high-skilled jobs. But many hospitals in North Carolina are fighting for their survival, facing budget cuts from Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurers, even though hospitals often get paid less than the cost of the life-saving care they provide. Over the next decade, North Carolina hospitals will face $7.8 billion in reduced revenues, putting our hospitals and the communities they serve at risk. If we want healthy communities, we need financially healthy hospitals that provide excellent care. Let's keep our hospitals in North Carolina healthy for all of us. Please join us at healthyhospitalsnc.org.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue our rundown of some of the legislative action that's taking place. Senate Bill 612 would prohibit cities and counties or state agencies from enacting or enforcing environmental rules or regulations that are stricter than the state rules or federal rules. Now, those people in favor of this say that this makes the state a more business-friendly state. Opponents say that these regulations are meant to be a floor. The federal regulations are meant to be a floor, not a ceiling to environmental protection. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I think that this has again been part of the sort of long-range plan of the Republicans to come in and make the state more competitive from a business standpoint. I think there is enough folk in the legislature who understand that you have to balance the bringing businesses in with protecting our environment. And I think they're going to find that find that happy balance. But I think for decades we've gone too far, and we need to come back to a little more practical viewpoint when we come to regulations. And I think this is actually a smart move because a lot of businesses have said it's too tough.
The only concern I have with that, even though I feel like this is more of a soundbite than a policy, there are things the federal government doesn't regulate. There are things the federal government leaves to the states because states have different rock formations and different mountain ranges and different bodies of water and different polluters and everything else. And once you set up this policy that you can be no stricter than the federal government, I think you're handcuffing states. You're not just making it available for business. You're saying to folks in North Carolina, you can't regulate your own environment.
Now let's be real clear about what this means. This is a state law, and it doesn't bind the legislature. Okay, what this is really about is a separation of powers issue. The legislature reserves the right to make policy. They can make a more stringent environmental regulation if they want to. This law says that state agencies, the executive branch, can't make policy more stringent, or localities can't make policy more stringent.
So the legislature
gets to decide.
Individual, very complicated, specific environmental regulation.
The legislature can authorize every time there's a major regulation, it's passed through the legislature first.
Major regulations, right. My point is that there's a ton of minor ones that are now going to have to go through the legislature.
If you're going to run a bill that says the Department of Environment and Natural Resources is going to take action in the following area, that is the legislature authorizing it. That is perfectly consistent with this law. That's the way to go.
Also, what I think other people tend to forget is that on top of all these regulations are these local regulations that everyone has to deal with. So that pile-on effect has a tremendous impact.
They're going to let local governments do what they want. In the earlier
but the state does.
All right, wait a minute. I got one more topic I want to get before we get out of this segment, and that's immigration. We saw a protest in the legislature this week about immigration reform, and a proposal which was modified this week, which originally had allowed the driver's licenses to be issued to illegal or undocumented immigrants in North Carolina, but required law enforcement officials, when they stopped them, to determine whether they were here legally or not. The bill was modified this week, as I understand it, to say that the law enforcement officials didn't have to conduct that. Does that make it any more palatable, John, to these people that are in favor of it?
You mean, does it make it more palatable to groups that advocate
for immigrants?
Rights? I'm sure they prefer this version to the previous version. I'm not sure it makes a whole lot of difference. The argument was before law enforcement, if stopping them for something else was going to be required to investigate their status, now I guess it'd be optional.
All right, we're going to talk about protests when we come back after these messages.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch A Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthiernc.com.
As homeowners, we count on the mortgage interest and property tax deductions.
I bought a home knowing that I would save on my state taxes.
My home is not an ATM for politicians in Raleigh.
I already pay my fair share.
It's wrong for politicians in Raleigh to take more of my money for their so-called tax reform.
It will hurt our fragile economy.
It will decrease home values and cost us money.
Help save the mortgage interest and property tax deductions. Visit taxreformfacts.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
Led by the state NAACP, a group of activists and civil rights leaders staged a protest Monday outside the legislative building directed toward legislators with what they described as a regressive Republican agenda. Their protests were over more than the voter ID bill and included concerns that legislators had refused to expand Medicaid, cut unemployment benefits, eliminated the earned income tax credit, and limited voting options. Building officials and legislative police asked the protesters to disperse, and when they didn't, 17 were arrested. Chris, we believe people ought to have the right to protest actions of government, but you almost got the feeling these people wanted to be arrested so as to help promote their cause. What do you make of this?
I think they knew they were going to be arrested if they kept protesting. They have a right to be in the legislative building. They have a right to speak at their mind, and if they're disrupting the legislative process, then they're going to be arrested. I think they know that going in. We have a long history in this country of this happening. And I thought everybody handled this, the legislative, the police and everybody seemed to handle this in the appropriate way. and that's just part of democracy.
Linda, I want to ask the question, what is Reverend Barber's end game here? What is it he's trying to accomplish with these protests? Because he says he's going to go to 20 counties across the state. He's going to have another protest on the bicentennial malls. What's his end game?
Well, I don't purport to speak for Reverend Barber, but I would say that he's trying to bring recognition to these issues because I believe they are moral issues, and we need to be recognizing the human dignity of individuals, and that is what the legislature is not doing through some of the bills.
But Chris, is this going to change anybody's opinion over in the building? In the legislative building?
You know, I don't think so, because I think that these sorts of tactics, they're built for show, and they are you can protest in front of the General Assembly, but when you're asked to do something certain and you're arrested and cause trouble, those sorts of things wear on. All
right, I know we're getting a lot of media exposure with this, John. The question is, how's the public reacting to all of this? We got any?
Civil disobedience, by definition, means breaking the law, and so there's no question that that's the intention, and that's fine. Civil disobedience is an effective tactic when you have great tyrannical events, moral evils. I just think they're choosing the wrong tactic for the issues that they brought up. I think it's hyperbolic. I think it's counterproductive, but I guess we'll find out.
You've got several other big words you could use here. You've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. We hope you'll join us next week when Henry Hinton will be sitting in this chair, and we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.